I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, my silk bridal gown pooling around my feet like a white shadow. The air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax, but the silence was suffocating. Above me, the massive crystal chandeliers were dimmed, casting long, jagged shadows against the gold-leafed walls. I wasn't waiting for my groom. I was waiting for the federal task force. In my hand, I gripped a single catering invoice, a piece of paper that proved my perfect fiance hadn't just been cheating on me, but had been using our wedding to clean the dirty money of a city-wide smuggling ring. "You look beautiful, Odette," a voice whispered from the darkness of the mezzanine. I didn't turn around. I knew that voice. It was Cassian, the man I was supposed to marry in 12 hours. The man who had convinced me that our $500,000 wedding was a celebration of our legacy. "I'm not just beautiful, Cassian," I said, my voice steady, sounding like cold steel. "I'm expensive, and according to your books, I've already been paid for 3 times over by people who don't even exist." Cassian stepped into the light, his handsome face frozen in a mask of confusion that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What are you talking about, honey?" "The stress is getting to you. Come back to the hotel. We have a big day tomorrow." "Oh, there's going to be a big day, Cassian," I replied, finally turning to face him. "But you won't be wearing a tuxedo. You'll be wearing a number." To understand how I went from a blushing bride to a forensic whistleblower, you have to understand the man Cassian claimed to be. He was a social architect, a philanthropist who supposedly built community centers and funded arts programs. When we met 18 months ago at a gallery opening, he moved through the room with the grace of a king. He was charming, articulate, and seemed deeply invested in my work as a jewelry curator. "You have an eye for what's real, Odette," he told me that night, his hand grazing mine as we looked at a rare sapphire. "In a world full of fakes, you're the only thing that shines with actual light." I fell for it. I fell for the expensive dinners, the weekend trips to secluded vineyards, and the way he talked about our future, as if it were a sacred contract. When he proposed on a terrace overlooking the city, he didn't just give me a ring, he gave me a dream. He insisted on a massive, high-society wedding at the Gilded Pillar, the city's most prestigious and expensive venue. "I want the world to see how much I value you," he said, taking over the wedding planning with a fervor that I mistook for romantic devotion. "I'll handle the vendors, the contracts, and the logistics. You just focus on the design. I want this to be a masterpiece." For 6 months, I lived in a blissfully ignorant fairy tale. Cassian was the perfect partner, or so it seemed. But as the wedding date grew closer, the perfection started to crack. It began with the guest list. Cassian had added nearly 300 names that I didn't recognize, names he claimed were old family friends and high-profile business associates from his international work. "Why is your college roommate's grandmother invited twice under different last names?" I asked one evening, looking over the spreadsheet. Cassian laughed it off, pulling me into a hug. "Just a clerical error by the planning team, babe. I'll have Lydia fix it. Don't worry about the small stuff." Lydia. She was our wedding planner, a woman with sharp eyes and a smile that never felt warm. She and Cassian were constantly huddled in planning sessions that lasted well into the night. Whenever I entered the room, the conversation would stop abruptly, and they would pivot to discussing floral arrangements or seating charts. The red flags turned into sirens 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at the venue for a final walkthrough when I bumped into the head of the catering staff. I thanked him for accommodating our massive request for 500 pounds of premium Kobe beef and 300 bottles of vintage crystal. The caterer looked at me, perplexed. "Mrs. Vance? I think there's a misunderstanding. We only have you down for a standard chicken and fish service for 200 people, and we haven't received a shipment of crystal. We're serving the house Prosecco. That's impossible," I said, my heart beginning to race. I saw the invoice. My fiancé paid 4 times the standard rate for the premium menu. "I don't know what you saw, ma'am," he replied, checking his tablet. "But according to our system, this event was paid for in cash installments by a company called Lydia's Events and Logistics, and the amount we received was the base tier package." I felt a cold shiver of dread. I didn't say anything to Cassian that night. Instead, I waited until he was asleep and used his thumbprint to unlock his phone. I navigated to his business apps, searching for Lydia's Events and Logistics. What I found wasn't a wedding plan. It was a laundering cycle. Cassian and Lydia weren't just planning a wedding, they were using the event as a ghost venue. They were forging contracts with vendors, claiming to pay them 5 times their actual rates in cash or untraceable transfers. In reality, they were using Cassian's illegal income from a luxury car smuggling ring to pay these fake invoices. The money was entering the wedding budget as dirty cash, and coming out the other side as clean business expenses paid to vendors who were either in on the scam or were shell companies owned by Lydia herself. But the betrayal went deeper. I found a folder titled Exit Strategy Post Nuptials. Inside were documents that showed Cassian had been forging my signature on tax filings for the last year. He had listed me as the primary director of 3 shell companies involved in the laundering. If the authorities ever caught on, the paper trail led directly to me. I was his scapegoat. He wasn't marrying me to start a life. He was marrying me to buy insurance for his crimes. He was going to use our wedding as the final, massive wash of his illegal funds. And then, according to his notes, he planned to separate within 6 months, leaving me to face the IRS and the FBI while he vanished with his clean millions. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the man I thought was my soulmate breathe peacefully in his sleep. I looked at the engagement ring on my finger. The diamond I now realized was probably bought with the blood and sweat of people he had exploited. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a cold, surgical clarity take over my mind. The next morning, I contacted a forensic accountant who specialized in white-collar crime. We met in a basement archive, far from the prying eyes of Cassian's security team. It's a classic layering scheme, Odette, the accountant said, his eyes scanning the digital files I had pulled. He's inflating the wedding budget to justify large cash movements. By the time the cake is cut, he'll have laundered nearly $4 million through this one event. And because your name is on the director's list for the shell companies, you're the one who's going to prison for it. Not if I hand him to them first, I said. I didn't cancel the wedding. That would have alerted him. Instead, I became the most cooperative bride in history. I helped him verify the fake guest lists. I smiled when Lydia told me the budget had increased due to last-minute decor changes. I even let Cassian think he was gaslighting me about the caterer's misunderstanding. You're just stressed, Odette, he told me, stroking my hair. Everything is perfect. Just trust me. I trusted him. I trusted him to be exactly who he was, a predator. And while he was busy planning his grand exit, I was busy planning his grand entrance into a federal courtroom. I secretly reached out to every legitimate vendor. The florist, the band, the photographer. I found out that most of them hadn't even been paid yet. They were working on good faith because of Cassian's reputation. I paid them out of my own personal savings, money my parents had left me, to ensure they wouldn't pull out and ruin the trap. But I had them sign a different kind of contract. A non-disclosure agreement that stated they would follow my cues on the day of the wedding, not Cassian's or Lydia's. I also contacted the Tax Enforcement Division and the Financial Crimes Bureau. I didn't just give them a tip. I gave them a roadmap. I provided the encrypted logs, the forged contracts, and the evidence that my signature had been falsified. We reached an agreement. They would let the event proceed just far enough to capture the final transfer of funds, ensuring the money laundering charge was ironclad. Now, here I was, the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner had just ended, and Cassian had invited me to the ballroom for a private moment. You've been quiet tonight, Cassian said, stepping closer to me in the dim light of the ballroom. He reached out to touch my face, but I stepped back, my white silk dress rustling against the floor. I'm just thinking about the vows, Cassian, I said. For better or for worse? For richer or for poorer? Did you know that in some legal jurisdictions, those vows don't apply if the marriage was entered into under fraudulent pretenses? The mask finally slipped. His eyes narrowed, and the charming social architect vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating criminal I had discovered on his phone. What did you do, Odette? I didn't do anything, Cassian. You did. You built this entire cathedral of lies. I'm just the one who's about to pull the thread that brings it all down. From the shadows of the ballroom's main entrance, 3 figures emerged. They weren't vendors. They weren't guests. They were wearing tactical vests with IRSCI and FBI emblazoned on the back. Cassian turned, his face pale, his hands beginning to shake. He looked at the agents, then back at me. You ruined us. You ruined everything. We could have had a life. I was doing this for us. No, Cassian, I said, my voice echoing through the massive empty ballroom. You were doing this for you. You were using the one day that was supposed to be about love to hide your greed. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a front. And you've just run out of time. As the agents moved in to read him his rights, I looked around at the masterpiece he had built. The flowers were beautiful, the gold leaf was shimmering, and the venue was breathtaking. But it was all hollow. It was just a fancy room, built for a crime that would never be completed. As they led him away in handcuffs, the silence returned to the ballroom. I stood there alone, a bride without a groom, in a dress that cost more than most people make in a year. But for the first time in 18 months, I felt truly rich, because tomorrow wasn't going to be the day I lost my freedom. It was the day I took it back. But as I watched them load Cassian into the black SUV outside, I noticed a second car pulling up. A car I didn't recognize, and inside sat Lydia, looking at me through the tinted glass with a look of cold, calculating promise. I realized then that Cassian was just the face of the operation. The real architect was still at large, and she had the keys to my business accounts. The war wasn't over. It had just moved from the ballroom to the boardroom. The black SUV disappeared into the night, carrying Cassian toward a federal processing center. But the chill that settled over the ballroom wasn't from the air conditioning. It was from the realization that Lydia was still out there. I watched her car idle for a moment before it sped away, her eyes having sent a clear message. You've only cut off the hand. The head is still thinking. I didn't go back to the hotel. I didn't call my bridesmaids. I spent the rest of the night in the venue's back office with Agent Thorne and the forensic team. We had Cassian, but the money, the $4 million he had intended to clean through our wedding, was sitting in a digital limbo. And if Lydia got to it first, she would vanish, and my name would be the only one left on the fraudulent tax filings he had forged. She's moving the funds, Odette, Agent Thorne said, staring at a monitor that tracked the shell company's accounts in real time. The moment Cassian was arrested, a series of cancellation requests were sent to the vendors. She's trying to claw back the cash deposits and funnel them into a secondary laundering layer. I looked at the screen. She thinks she's canceling my wedding, but she's actually just triggering the trap I set 3 days ago. To the outside world, the morning of the wedding was a scene of chaos. News had leaked that the groom of the year had been arrested. Both of our families, the prestigious Fiances and the social climbing Thorns, were descending on the hotel in a state of hysterical shock. Cassian's mother was screaming about slander, and my own father was demanding to know how I could be so careless as to involve myself with a criminal. But I wasn't at the hotel. I was at the venue, standing in the middle of the foyer as Lydia walked in. She looked impeccable in a sharp, slate-gray suit, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She didn't look like a woman whose partner had just been arrested. She looked like a woman who was coming to collect her paycheck. Odette, darling, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she approached me. What a tragedy. I've already started the process of settling with the vendors. It's going to be a mess, but I'll handle the liquidations. Just sign these loss mitigation forms so I can protect your personal credit. I looked at the folder she held out. It was a transfer of authority. If I signed it, Lydia would have full control over the refunds, essentially giving her the $4 million in clean, processed checks. You really think I'm that much of an aesthetic-obsessed fool, don't you, Lydia? I asked, not reaching for the pen. Lydia's smile faltered. I don't know what you mean. I'm trying to save you from a prison sentence. Cassian left you in the line of fire. I'm the only one who can pull you out. No, I said, stepping closer. Cassian was the face. He was the one who played the part of the romantic hero. But you were the one who forged the contracts. You were the one who set up the shell companies in my name. And you were the one who thought that because I curate jewelry, I wouldn't know how to spot a flaw in a person. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a speaker system I had rigged to the ballroom's audio. Lydia's voice filled the room. Once the I do's are said, the final payment to the florist shell company triggers the transfer. Odette will be the primary director of record. By the time the feds trace the beef and lobster fraud, we'll be in Dubai. Cassian, stop worrying. She's too busy picking out lace patterns to look at a ledger. Lydia went pale. The sound of her own voice plotting my downfall was echoing off the very walls she had planned to use as a laundromat. The vendors didn't sign your cancellation forms, Lydia, I said, because I've already paid them their real fees, and in exchange, they gave me the original copies of the forged contracts you sent them. The ones with your digital fingerprint on the metadata. Before she could scream or run, Agent Thorne and his team stepped out from the bridal suite. Lydia Vance, you are under arrest for racketeering, grand larceny, and corporate identity theft. As they led her away, Lydia didn't cry like Cassian had. She spat at me, her face contorted with a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. You'll have nothing, Odette. Your name is ruined. No one will ever trust a Vance again. My name isn't Vance anymore, Lydia, I said, watching her go. I'm taking back my maiden name today. And as for my reputation, I'm the woman who just took down the city's biggest laundering ring. I think I'll be just fine. But the hardest part wasn't the arrest. It was the confrontation. 2 hours later, I walked into the hotel's grand breakfast room, where both families were gathered, arguing and crying. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and desperation. When I walked in, still wearing my bridal makeup but in a simple, sharp white suit, the room went silent. Odette! Thank God! Cassian's father stood up, his face red. You have to use your influence. Tell the press this was a business misunderstanding. Our family cannot be associated with this kind of thievery. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. Thievery? Arthur, your son didn't just steal money. He stole a wedding. He used your family name as a shield for a smuggling ring. And he used me, the woman he claimed to love, as a human sacrifice for his greed. I looked at my own parents. And to you, I'm sorry that the wedding of the century is canceled. But I'm not sorry that I saved our family's legacy from being used as a criminal's plaything. Cassian didn't just make a mistake. He and Lydia were laundering $4 million through this event. They booked ghost guests and fake lobsters to wash the blood off their hands. I threw the stack of real vendor invoices onto the table. I've spent the last 6 months being the perfect bride. I've spent the last 6 months letting a man gaslight me into believing I was too emotional to understand the business. Well, the business is closed. Cassian is in jail. Lydia is in jail, and I have already filed for a full annulment on the grounds of criminal fraud. Cassian's mother started to sob. But the scandal, everyone will know. Good, I said. Let them know. Let them know that a woman's wedding is not a business transaction. And let them know that the Vance brand stands for something real. The fallout was massive, but I didn't hide. I held a press conference the following morning. I stood in front of the cameras, the same ones that were supposed to capture my walk down the aisle, and I told the truth. I explained the laundering cycle. I explained how predators use emotional milestones to hide financial crimes. The Gilded Pillar venue was shut down for a full audit. The smuggling ring was dismantled within weeks, leading to 15 other arrests across the city. Cassian and Lydia were both sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. I didn't lose my business. In fact, Odette Interiors became more successful than ever. People didn't just want my eye for design anymore. They wanted my eye for integrity. I became a consultant for high net worth individuals, helping them audit their own lives to ensure they weren't being exploited by the people they trusted most. A year later, on what would have been my first anniversary, I went back to that ballroom at the Gilded Pillar. It had been reopened under new management. I wasn't wearing a bridal gown. I was wearing a black dress and carrying a glass of vintage wine that I had paid for myself. I stood in the center of the room, looking up at the chandeliers. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I felt a profound sense of power. I had stood at that altar and refused to be a victim. I had taken a dream that was turned into a nightmare and forged it into a weapon. To the women hearing my voice, a wedding is just a day. A marriage is just a contract. But your identity, your financial freedom, your signature, those are your life. Never let a man, no matter how charming, no matter how philanthropic, take the keys to your world. If he tells you the details are too boring for you, he's telling you that your eyes are in the way of his hands. Don't be afraid to be the difficult bride. Don't be afraid to ask for the receipts. And if you find out the man you love is using you as a front, don't just leave him at the altar. Leave him in the hands of the law. I am Odette. I didn't get my fairy tale ending. I got something much better. I got my truth. And in the end, that's the only thing that actually shines with real light. Now, I have to ask you, if you found out today that your dream life was being funded by someone else's nightmare, would you stay for the comfort or would you burn it all down for the truth? Have you ever felt like a partner in a relationship where you were actually just a proxy? Let's talk about the cost of silence in the comments, because a beautiful life is only beautiful if it's honest.